Hi everyone, I thought I should just chip in here from 2015 briefly, given that I'm recycling so much content from previous years. And the first thing I thought I'd do is just give you a bit of a reminder of something I talked about back in week 1 in the very first meLecture about the recyclability of content. And what I do in terms of taking footage, taking photographs on my phone, even without any specific purpose in mind, sometimes thinking, well, this in future may well work for me. I thought it was a good time, given that at the moment you're finalising, or if you've maybe just finalised your video project for the Module 2 exercise, you might want to think about what footage have I taken, even stuff you may not have even used as part of your assignment, and is there stuff you want to keep around? Don't just delete all the raw footage that you've edited into your final 5-minute clip. And what I do, and this is just an example of it, rather cheap these days, the external hard drives don't cost much money at all, is keep everything on this kind of device, just in case. It's always just in case, that rationale of maybe one day I'll need this could be useful. So it's good to think about this stuff now, and even over summer you may well see something and think of something that you could do and maybe make another video later on. I hope you've got a lot out of this process that you're going through. It can be very frustrating. It's new to probably most people in the unit, brand new, this making a video, but people generally find that it's incredibly rewarding when it's over, or at least very relieving when it's over. So I hope it's going well. As I was saying before, to follow up on what I was saying about ideology 2 years ago, if that makes sense, no text, no cultural text is ideologically neutral. And what I've done here is give you a survey across different media forms of how some meanings about digital media culture are negotiated in text, and I do sort of a deconstruction of these. So this gives you an idea of the kind of thing we'll be doing in seminars, and I hope online, over the next few weeks. So enjoy! M.T. Anderson's science fiction novel Feed, as you can see on the front cover, is based on people having microchips implanted in their heads from a very young age. And essentially the plot revolves around a group of young teenagers who are going about their everyday lives, shopping. They go into shops, and it's kind of like Minority Report if you've seen the Steven Spielberg film In a Way with Tom Cruise, that they go into shops and whatever they look at, they get advertisements injected straight into their minds relating to that based on preferences and so on. They also have essentially a social media function where they have instant messaging conversations straight into their minds without actually speaking. They just think to each other. So it's a really complex representation of a future with technology that's gone wild in a sense. And the representation of the users of this technology is very critical about young people in contemporary day, because as we know, all fiction about the future is actually about the present. And what's happened to these people in the book is that their language has deteriorated. They say things like a lot, which could sound a little bit familiar, but it goes beyond that. And I'll just read out a paragraph from a chapter here, which really shows the kind of negative representation of the impacts of these microchips, the feeds, but really it's about social media in terms of this novel. School, TM, is not so bad now. Not like back when my grandparents were kids, when the schools were run by the government, which sounds completely like Nazi to have the government running the schools. Back then it was big boring, and all the kids were meg null because they didn't learn anything useful. It was like blah 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 blah, this happened in 1492, da 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 da. When you mix like chalk and water it makes nitroglycerin, and that kind of shit. And nothing was useful. And so the novel's ideological representation of young people is inherently negative. All they care about these days is shopping, going on holiday, taking various kinds of substances and so on. What's not important anymore is education. Indeed, the whole educational system is being bankrupted of meaning by social media, or at least through the metaphor of the feed. The whole world runs on the feed in this novel, and that's one really interesting representation which critiques contemporary digital media. And now, let's have a look at film. When it comes to the subject of film, there is just so much that we could talk about. This is particularly the case with fiction films, although you might also like to think about documentary films you've seen. I've gestured to a number of examples in the latest study notes document, but I'm sure you've seen many more in the last year alone that could be talked about in relation to the portrayal of digital media culture. One film that I wanted to briefly focus on here is Alan Rifkin's 2007 film Look. And this film is designed to appear as if it's screened entirely through CCTV, surveillance camera footage. And what Look does is essentially combine the narratives, dramatised, fictionalised narratives of a group of people. And these narratives intersect to some extent throughout the film. The opening titles of the film state that, quote, "There are an estimated 30 million surveillance cameras in the United States generating more than 4 billion hours of video every week. On any given day, the average American is captured approximately 200 times. And what's really interesting about this is if I went to the special features and listened to the director's commentary, and the director noted that his motivation for this film is actually drawn from an experience he had when he ran a red light camera and that camera took a picture of him. That picture was sent to him in the mail, and he was, to quote him from the commentary, he was unnerved that I could be photographed without my knowledge. So that experience made this director think, okay, this is a different way that I could tell a story. How often he started to actually notice how often people are being videoed constantly at every single moment of the day in lots of different places. Now, we don't often have an apparent intention of a filmmaker to look at in relation to a film, and it's not really important what the intention of a filmmaker is. But I find it ironic in this film that the director seems to be so unnerved by surveillance, but at the same time, this film basically reinforces the necessity of surveillance. So what this film does is provide a series of dramatised narratives of people who sometimes meet in the film but are usually going about their everyday lives. And what's really significant about this film, which on the surface seems to be critiquing the all-pervasiveness and problematic nature of camera surveillance in society, it actually reinforces it. And the way that it does that is shows all of these characters, without exception throughout the film, undertaking various kinds of immoral or corrupt or criminal behaviour. They're misbehaving in all different kinds of ways. You've got car accidents where drivers driving dangerously hit another car and then speed off. This is captured on camera. There is also adultery. There is shoplifting. There is sexual harassment in the workplace. There are people who have sex or masturbate or take drugs in the stockroom of a big store while they're supposed to be helping customers. There's a pedophile who goes around stalking a young child and eventually kidnaps her. There's also a case where a high school teacher has sex with one of his students in his car in the school parking lot at night, and then is captured via security camera and taken to the police station where he's filmed there too during the interrogation process. So without exception, this film is showing deviant or criminal behaviour and how that's captured on camera. And the viewer is given a strong sense when they think about it that this is kind of, as much as it's disturbing to watch, at least it's been captured on camera. So it's actually under the surface, this film that's supposed to be critiquing surveillance is reinforcing the necessity of capturing this deviant and criminal behaviour, this misbehaviour on film. Oh, and by the way, if you thought that it was enough just having a film of Look, you've also now got the TV series. You can kind of see from the cover what kind of voyeuristic intent, just like the film this series has. Now we'll move on to a medium of a different sort, console games.
Sky looks so much better when it's not full of helicopters that are all trying to kill us.
Alright, so without Batman's... Shut up, Batman. Without Batman's local surveillance and sonar vision, I would not have necessarily known where to go. This game, Batman Arkham City, like its predecessor, Batman Arkham Asylum, is heavily reliant on the rhetorics of surveillance, and certainly the aesthetics of surveillance as well. What's really interesting in this game is that it's a way in which you find what you're looking for, whether it's through the missions. You can look up your digital gadgets, and it's got all the information you need, or whether it's through tracking phone calls and finding out where the serial killer has gone next, trying to locate the clues. So there's sort of the narrative and the aesthetics of this game, like the films of Batman recently, are heavily reliant on surveillance. Another form of gaming that I wanted to talk about briefly is something you wouldn't necessarily expect to collide with digital media all that often. I have to admit that I was a little bit surprised when I saw a new board game like The Social Game. This game, quite clearly, is influenced by various elements of contemporary social media. It's not the most complex of games, so I thought I'd give you a quick overview of what's involved in gameplay as best I can in a few seconds. Essentially, this game is a competitive game, a point that I'll come back to at the end. And so in this board game, you are playing as a user of the fictional social media program Status. And to quote the rulebook, you are trying to get the highest consensus from your fans to win the discussion. Then you can spend your reputation to make your profile the most popular on the web and have the greatest number of friends. The winner of the game is the player who owns the most friends." End quote. So the goal of this game for a player is to win by buying, or as it says in the rulebook, owning more friends than everyone else. And you can see that these friend cards here, you can choose, I guess, whether or not you want them to be male or female friends. It's not absolutely crucial to the gameplay, are your goal. And the way in which you buy friends is to actually spend a number of likes. And you've got these tokens here. You have the tokens, here's a like side, and there's also a loser side, and you just flip those up and see what you get each turn. And if you have 3, you can buy a friend and get closer to your goal of winning the game. All these tokens are kept in the infinite web of the board game box. Another element of this game, and it's a game for 3 to 8 players, is to start with a profile. And you start with one profile. You might collect more as the game goes on, but you can see here that there is a playfulness in its appropriation of various stereotypes of the nerd, and each of these profiles has a superpower that you can employ throughout the game. The nerd, you've got the poser, bookworm. So you've got the show off. Once per round you can look at one user's hand for 10 seconds, so that's the superpower of that. You can be the jerk, metalhead, discman, jock, emo, etc, etc. What's quite significant here in terms of ideology is that there are only, out of a rather large pile of profile cards, there are only 3 that are clearly identified as female profiles, and you've got very gendered representation here, quite feminine characteristics given to the cosplayer of the cheerleader, that's another one there, humiliation being the superpower. Presumably you humiliate other players. And it's the supermodel, which kind of speaks for itself. Another element of this game is that each round we have one troll. One player is the troll, and they get these 2 cards, and the troll is essentially, it's a good thing to be the troll. You administer the game rounds, and you can tag one player using this card during a round, and you essentially compete to try and steal their likes. Now, it's interesting that this part of the game is called discussion, even though you are essentially competing and trying to steal someone's likes so that you can get an advantage in the game. And I'll just give you a look at some of these other cards here. These are the posts that can be played throughout the game. What's really interesting in this game is you can also form alliances. So you might form temporary alliances with people to benefit yourself, but also them, and more importantly, disadvantage other players. So while it is a game about social media and you might expect it to be about cooperation, you actually find yourself in more of a survivor scenario where you are forming alliances, trying to win and defeat the other players. And that's the point that I wanted to end on, because while we expect social media to be a somewhat participatory and democratizing force, as we've been talking about this trimester, this game, it's all about winning. And if you can be the troll, and you can get more likes, you can buy more friends, you own more friends, and you win. And that's a very interesting discourse around social media in a board game. Now, it's important to acknowledge that the way in which a game is designed is not necessarily the way in which it is played. Just as in the way in which a book is written or a film is made, we might have resistant readings and we might read against the text in certain ways. And that's an important point to note. Nonetheless, the conventions of a board game, or in the language of board games, the mechanics, certainly do generate certain meanings and position the users or the players to use the game in certain ways. So it could well be that the exaggerated visual depiction of the profiles in this game, those cards that have the stereotypes, might actually be argued to be acknowledged as stereotypes because of the exaggerated artwork of the game. But what's interesting is that even despite this, we've only got 3 female characters, or obviously female characters, which are represented in very heavily gendered ways. So while people, we could argue some players might be aware of this, and might resist this, the game does put forward certain ideological messages regarding the users of digital media. And here's the big question: how many people do you know who would actually have noticed? Tiff, I think it's your turn. I'm playing a game with my friends. This is a cooperative game. We're not playing against each other, we're playing with each other. Cooperative board games are becoming an increasing phenomenon, and all those behind me right now are also cooperative games, where you play with the other players against the game. And what was so ironic and interesting about that game, like the social game, is that it wasn't a cooperative game, as you might expect a game on social media with its democratic potential to be. It was a competitive game where you tear down your opponents to win. Have a good week, everyone. A really key concept that we're looking at in relation to this topic is ideology. And if I could quote Adam Brown briefly, he writes that Adam Brown... A key concept we're looking at this week is ideology. And to give you a definition of this, I'd like to quote Adam Brown from 2012, who wrote that M.T. Anderson's novel Feed is a dystopian representation of the future when, as you can see on the front cover, people have microchips or feeds implanted in their minds, or their oh no! Oh no!
Adam, stop!
It's bad!
I can't look.
Oh no! Tiffany, are you going to take your turn? This game is going to take all night.
You realise it's a Star Wars mask.